Welcome to Learning English with Captain Binoy Varakil, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph's College, Devgiri, Calicut, Kerala. Today we discuss one of the stories from Ways with Words. Ways with Words is A02, the common course in English for the first year degree students of the colleges of University of Calicut. In the previous lectures, we have discussed the poems of William Shakespeare and John Keats. This is in fact the third lecture in this series of lectures on Ways with Words. And today we discuss William Somerset Maugham, a British playwright, novelist and short story writer. In fact, we are discussing a very small story from the collection of William Somerset Maugham. So we can't just say that this is in fact a story from any collections of William Somerset Maugham. This is in fact a part from one of the plays of William Somerset Maugham. The play is titled Sheppey, and from the 1933 title drama of William Somerset Maugham, we have a conversation between Death and the protagonist of the play, Sheppey, and that conversation is the very small one paragraph story we learn today. Before that, let us just look at the life and literary career of William Somerset Maugham. So as I told you right now, Somerset Maugham is of course British. He is a playwright, novelist and a story writer. He was born in Paris because his father was working in the British Embassy in France, and they were living in Paris, and he is born in Paris to Edith Mary Nee Snell and Robert Ormond Maugham. Of course, like the previous authors, we saw William Shakespeare and John Keats, the boyhood days, the childhood days of W. Somerset Maugham was also rather miserable because he was orphaned at the age of 10, and thereafter he was looked after by his uncle and aunt, and he lived in England with his uncle and aunt. And thereafter, of course, he was given education, and he just got trained as a surgeon, but he did not practice as a surgeon. He saw that he has more talent in writing. William Somerset Maugham published his first novel in the year 1897, and the first novel of William Somerset Maugham is Liza of Lambeth. Liza of Lambeth, the first novel of William Somerset Maugham, is rather autobiographical because in this novel he is sharing, or rather he is narrating all those experiences he had as a medical student at the slum of Lambeth. And thereafter, after 1897 title Liza of Lambeth, Somerset Maugham wrote a lot of novels, and he has produced titles like The Painted Veil of 1925, O Human Bondage in 1915, The Moon and Sixpence in 1916, Cakes and Ale in 1930, and The Racer's Edge in 1944. And we have now another very important incident in world history. We have World War I and World War II. And William Somerset Maugham joined the First World War, and he just served the British Army as an ambulance driver along with the great writers Ernest Hemingway and E. Cummings. And of course, after his short tenure as an ambulance driver during the World War I. So he worked for the British Secret Intelligence Service, and all these experiences we have in another title, that is the 1928 title, British Agent. And he has also traveled far and wide. he traveled Europe, he traveled in America, he traveled of course in India, and all these travel experiences we have in some of his titles, and of course he has written some drama as well. And the most important plays of William Somerset Maugham are: number one is Lady Frederick of 1907, another one is Jack Straw of 1912, yet another one is The Unknown of 1920, and another one is Our Betters 1923, and yet another title is The Constant Wife, and the last play of William Somerset Maugham is the 1933 title Sheppey, from which the very story we study right now is taken. And now when we discuss the story, we have to of course have an understanding of the very geographical area where the story is set. The story is set in Middle East, and the name of the short story is Appointment in Samarra. Appointment in Samarra, and we have to understand the significance of the place name Samarra in the story. So Samarra is a city that stands on the east bank of the river Tigris. So we have the Tigris River, the Euphrates River, and on the east bank of river Tigris we have the city Samarra, and it approximately 70 miles north of Baghdad we have the city Samarra. So one side, east bank of Tigris, we have Samarra the city, and almost 70 miles north of Baghdad we have the Samarra city. So in short, we have to understand the fact that there is a distance of 70 miles between Samarra and Baghdad. And the story we learn today takes place in Baghdad, the city Baghdad. And the most important places we discuss in the story are, one is Samarra, the other is Baghdad. Now let's look at the story. I'll read the story, thereafter I'll explain the story. Appointment in Samarra. Death speaks. There was a merchant in Baghdad who sent his servant to market to buy provisions, and in a little while the servant came back, white and trembling, and said, "Master, just now when I was in the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd, and when I turned, I saw it was death that jostled me. She looked at me and made a threatening gesture. Now, lend me your horse, and I will ride away from this city and avoid my fate. I will go to Samarra, and there death will not find me." The merchant lent him his horse, and the servant mounted it, and he dug his purse in its flanks, and as fast as the horse could gallop, he went. Then the merchant went down to the marketplace, and he saw me standing in the crowd, and he came to me and said, "Why did you make a threatening gesture to my servant when you saw him this morning?" "That was not a threatening gesture," I said. "It was only a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him in Baghdad, for I had an appointment with him tonight in Samarra." So this is the small story we have to discuss, Appointment in Samarra of William Somerset Maugham. So we have to understand a background of this story, Appointment in Samarra, and this story is in fact a retelling of an Arabic tale. Somerset Maugham included this tale at the end of his last play, Sheppey, in 1933, as a conversation between the protagonist Sheppey and Death. And the dialogue, the story we just read right now is a conversation between Death and the protagonist Sheppey. And of course this story is included in many other collections, and we have the story in one of the novels of John O'Hara. He is just using this story as an epigraph to his 1952 novel, John O'Hara's 1952 novel. And later we have the great writer Jeffrey Archer, and Jeffrey Archer's anthology of short stories, collection of short stories. To cut a long story short of 2000, year 2000, has this short story as one of the inclusions. So that is about the appointment in Samarra, the story we discussed. So know that this is in reality taken from the last play of Somerset Maugham. Now we will have a short discussion of the story, Appointment in Samarra. As we know, this is a story with very few characters. We have the character of the merchant, the servant of the merchant, and Death. Let's understand the fact that Death is dressed or appearing as a lady. So we have the character of Death as a lady, we have the merchant, and we have the servant of the merchant. The story is taking place in Baghdad, and early morning the servant is sent to the market to buy provisions by the merchant. The merchant is sending a servant, and the servant will be buying provisions. Provisions means vegetable, fruits, and the other essential things they need at the home. So the servant goes to the market, and in the market he is very surprised by a lady. There is a lady, and the lady is, as we read in the stories, jostling the servant. So here jostling in fact means, jostling is a game, and in that game of jostling we have two opponents on horseback hitting each other with spears. So here there is no jostling as such, but what happened is the lady looks at the servant, and the servant is so afraid to see that there is something dangerous and threatening about the lady. And now the afraid, horrified servant comes back and tells his master that he saw Death, and he says that he wants his master's, the merchant's horse to ride away to Samarra. And now the master is giving the servant his horse, and the servant mounts on the horse and gallops to Samarra, which is almost 70 miles away. So from Baghdad, the servant runs away to Samarra. And after some time, the merchant himself goes to the market to see what happened, to understand who threatened his servant. And the merchant saw Death, the same lady, which is of course Death. And the merchant asks, "Why did you jostle my servant?" And Death says, "No, I did not jostle him. I did not want to jostle him. What happened is I was surprised to see him, because I never thought that I was going to see him in Baghdad, because I had a meeting with him at Samarra, and I was very surprised to see him in the Baghdad. This evening I was going to meet him at Samarra. Then of course I was very surprised to see him in Baghdad." This is this story, and this story is very meaningful because it's about fatalism. We cannot run away from death. We cannot run away from anything that is to happen in our life. If there is going to be an accident, that accident will happen. If there is going to be death, that death will happen. If you have to fail, you will fail. If you have to succeed, you will succeed, because this is your fate. This is your destiny. and nobody can run away from his or her destiny. That is the message of the story. That's the great philosophy William Somerset Maugham conveying in this short dialogue between the hero Sheppey and the character Death. Death is personified as a lady. Now let's look at the important questions in the course book, Ways with Words, page number 62 and 63. We have some questions. I'll read out the questions and give you the answers. First question is, where is the story set? The story is set in Baghdad. Repeat, where is the story set? The story is set in Baghdad. Second question, why did the servant go to the market? The servant went to the market to buy provisions for his master, the merchant. Next question, why did the servant go to Samarra? The servant went to Samarra, or the servant did go to Samarra to escape death. He saw death in the city in Baghdad and he wants to run away from the city, and he goes to Samarra. Now we have short questions. The first short question, who is the narrator of the story? The narrator of the story is Death. Why was Death surprised to see the servant in Baghdad? Death was surprised to see the servant in Baghdad because the servant was having an appointment with Death that evening in Samarra. Next question, why did the servant flee to Samarra? The servant who was in market in Baghdad saw the Death personified as a lady, and being afraid of death, he ran away to Samarra, thinking that he will be safe in Samarra. Number fourth question, what do you think is the theme of the story? I told you in the beginning, the theme of the story is fatalism. Fatalism is a family of related philosophical doctrines that stress the subjugation of all events and actions to fate or destiny. We are all controlled by destiny. Our life is decided by fate. We cannot run away from whatever is our fate. If we have to die today, we will die today. We cannot change it. That is fate. And this story is an affirmation of the great doctrine of the philosophy of fatalism. And the next question is, what does appointment mean in this story? Appointment in this story means a meeting, a fixed meeting, a meeting you cannot change. And here, appointment in Samarra refers to the inevitable, unavoidable meeting between the servant and death. Next question, to whom is this story being told? The story is being told to Sheppey, the hero of the play of Somerset Maugham, Sheppey. Next question, question number 7. Usually death approaches others. In the story, the merchant approaches death. What does that signify? The merchant in the story approaches death to confirm whether it was death itself, because the servant came to the merchant and said that the servant was threatened by death, and the merchant wants to confirm whether it was death, or he wants to know what happened to his servant. And he is of course a careful master who wants to protect his servant, and he comes to the city and asks death what happened. And from this, of course, we have to understand the fact that the merchant is in fact very bold and courageous. Normally death comes to each of us. Death goes to the very victim who are going to die. In this story, the merchant is going to death because the merchant is not afraid of death, and the merchant has the conviction that if it's not his time, he won't die. If it's his time, he will die. So having a complete conviction of the reality of death, the reality of fate, the reality of destiny, the merchant goes to the city and confronts death in a very, very bold and heroic way. Now we come to the paragraph questions. The first paragraph question is comment on the language of this story. The language of the story by William Somerset Maugham is very simple and conversational. The story is written as if in a very colloquial conversational style. Every reader can read it in a single sitting, and everybody can understand it without any kind of difficulty. We understand that there are three characters. Character number 1 is the merchant, number 2 is the servant, number 3 is death, and the place names mentioned are Baghdad and Samarra, and of course simple, very graphic, vivid descriptions of the action in the story is so easy for anybody to understand. And we can say that, like in many other works of William Somerset Maugham, the language in this story is also very simple and easy to understand. Now we come to the next question. Discuss how the story expounds fatalism. This story very successfully and effectively expounds fatalism. Fatalism, we know that, is a philosophy in which it is just confirmed and affirmed emphatically that every human being or every living being or the entire universe is of course controlled by fate or destiny. And we have of course theological fatalism. In theological fatalism, people believe that everything is controlled by God. And this story is a very good affirmation of the fact that everything is decided by God. Everything is decided by fate. Here the servant is running away from Baghdad to Samarra to escape from death. But in fact he didn't know the fact that he had a predetermined, decided meeting in Samarra. So he runs away from Baghdad and comes to Samarra thinking that he is going to save himself. But he comes to the right place where he is having an appointment with death. And this is of course a wonderful story that is just expounding fatalism. Now we come to the next question. Why do you think death is gendered in this tale? So death is gendered in this tale as a female, as a lady. And this is in fact personification of the author. Somerset Maugham is personifying death to show that there is a connection between the nature of death and mankind. And of course we understand that here the servant is a man and death is a lady. So it is of course there can be a chance of attraction between this man and the lady, and the bewitching aspect of life, the bewitching aspect of death, and the tempting aspect of different aspects of life, right? We just want to live life. We just want to live a long life. We want to live even maybe more than 100 years, but one day we have to die. So we must be prepared to die any moment of our life. And okay, sometimes if we are impressed by, attracted by, captivated by all that is glittering and dazzling and fascinating, we should understand the fact that it is not going to last forever. So maybe if the servant is attracted by a lady, you should understand that there can be death, there can be something uncertain, and there can be inevitable death even in something that is attractive, that is also this particular lady. So in order to show the uncertainty and the mortality of the reality of mortality, Somerset Maugham is using personification, and right now it is just personification of death as a woman, and that is to help us to understand the connection between nature of death and mankind. Now we come to the essay question. How does Maugham bring out the idea of fatalism in this story? So as we discussed from the very beginning till the end, we understand that the story is about fatalism. The servant is running away to Samarra to help himself from escape from death, but we know that nowhere he has escape from death. Death will always be there. If he has to die that day, let him go anywhere. When his time comes, he will die. That is the case of every human being, and this particular aspect of human life is very, very effectively confirmed and substantiated in this story, Appointment in Samarra by William Somerset Maugham. So these are the very important points you have to remember. Read the story again and again, and listen to the questions and answers. Write down the questions and answers in your notebook and prepare very well for the examination. Thanks a lot for listening. May God bless you all. Bye-bye.